Welcome to Just a Dog Podcast, the podcast for thoughtful dog lovers and guardians. I am your host, Nadine. My guest on the podcast this week is canine behaviourist Andrew Hale. Andrew began his career in human psychology before moving into the dog world. When he made that shift, his focus was, of course, on training, on techniques, on getting behaviour to change, but through his own life experience and through two dogs who challenged him deeply, his perspective shifted. He began connecting what he already understood about human trauma, attachment, and emotional safety with what he was seeing in dogs. And interestingly, some of what we now understand about human social pain was actually first explored through research with dogs. So there is far more crossover between human psychology and canine psychology than people realize. In this episode, we talk about behavior as communication, we talk about coping, about relief, about why stopping a behavior is not the same as understanding it, and about what changes when you start seeing the dog in front of you as a nervous system trying to feel safe rather than a problem to solve. Enjoy. Andy, thank you so much for joining me on Just a Dog Podcast. I'm so happy to have you here.
Well, thanks for having me.
So you have a background in human psychology and then turned animal canine behaviorist. I would love to get a sense of what or who shaped your view when it comes to dogs specifically.
I guess there's a couple of life events for me. So I made the shift from working with humans to animals because of my own breakdown. I had a breakdown in my early 30s. And that was very much a result of what happened to me when I was younger. I've shared this before, it's no secret, but I experienced sexualized trauma when I was younger. And guess what? That affected my behavior. But the thing about trauma is this, Nadine, nothing changes in your world around you, but your perception of it does. So my family was the same, my friends were the same, my school was the same. But after that event, my perception of those things changed. So my behavior changed. And this is the thing about behavior. My school just saw me become this quite difficult, challenging child and treated me quite punitively to get me to behave. So I ended up getting the cane. So for anybody under probably, about 30, we used to hit kids with sticks. Crazy, isn't it? So I had the cane, and guess what? My behavior changed because punishment works in relation to just stopping a behavior. So I had to make a decision. Do I want this again or not? So I better behave. My family took an approach of they didn't know what had happened to me. I was very lucky as a child. I had everything I wanted, and that was because my parents worked very hard and they were away a lot. And my father, especially when these behavior changes started coming, he thought it was because they weren't around and weren't spending enough time as a family. And interestingly, before before that event, I never thought of it like that. I thought, well, this is great because I had nannies, or I had mums of the family look after me. After that event, now I resented them for not being there. It's because it changes in your brain. When you lose that deep safety, things change. So his approach was, look, we'll spend more time as a family, contingent on you behaving differently. So guess what, Nadine? My behavior changed because that was very reinforcing for me. But neither of them mattered for me because I was becoming performative. And actually, I spent all my 20s into my early 30s performing a role because that's how I'd learned that I needed to connect to the world. That's quite a heavy place to start, I know, but it's really important as part of this wider story for me because when I look back now, why did I go into human psychology? It was not only an interest in the subject, it was also about trying to subconsciously make sense of my own trauma. And now this is very relevant. I run a mentoring support service called Your Safe Space, which is designed for animal care professionals, because all of us within animal care, why are you working as a dog trainer? Why is somebody being a vet? And often when we examine that, it's born out of our own trauma. It's born out of our insecure attachments. It's born out of those situations where we find some activism because we feel, well, I want to give a dog a voice. I want to make sure that they're represented properly because I wasn't myself. And actually understanding part of our story means we can turn up to our work in a more emotionally healthy way, because quite often people who feel very strongly, they feel the feelings of others. That kind of empathy is often born out of their need to be hypervigilant as a child, for example. And the more I got into the human psychology and therapy side of things, the more I found myself moving into this area of really thinking about the individual's lived experience. individual's lived experience, which is unique. So we all have one, but they're all unique to us because we're all a unique combination of our genetics, epigenetics, trauma, secure, insecure attachments, life experiences, learning events, learning histories, all these kind of things. So that's the human side of it. It was my late mother, actually, who said, well, why don't you work with animals? And I thought, well, I love dogs, so let's do it. So that's how I ended up coming to dogs, really. And in my those early few years, I came through the usual route, really. I was very lucky to be influenced by positive trainers early on. So I didn't have to go through a kind of a crossover journey in that sense. But along came Milo. This is really great because when I came into the dog training world, a lot of what I thought about behavior before from humans, I didn't carry over. And that's an interesting phenomenon because I specialize in aggression now. And many of the dogs I work with are potentially dangerous, but they're only potentially dangerous because they're not feeling heard or feeling safe often. But I've worked with caregivers who may be child psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, and I have to almost give them permission to think, well, that stuff you know about humans, you can apply it to dogs. Right? Oh my God, yeah. And I was the same. So I never even thought about it. I didn't come into the dog world thinking, look at all these other things. I just thought, yeah, training dogs. And I was really into the mechanics of training. And this is the thing about reinforcement, Nadine. It's got nothing to do with dogs. It's got everything to do with the trainer because we get reinforced big time, don't we? Because, oh my God, I can get the dog to do this. So it's all wonderful, brilliant. Got a great education with like the IMDT and the ISCP. It was all going great. And then Milo, came along, first one of the two dogs. And Milo basically looked at me and said, right, you know all that stuff you know? Yeah, it's all great, but I've got something I need to share with you. Otherwise, we're not going to get on. God, he humbled me, Nadine. We can all share stories about doggies that do. And then, so Milo started that process and we're thinking, oh, right, okay, maybe it's not what I need to get you to do. Maybe it's what I need to learn from you about how you need to operate. Still didn't click for me about some of the journey I'd been on the human side of stuff until Arthur came along. No, it's tough talking about Arthur because we only lost him this year. And bloody hell, sorry now a little bit, but our relationship was forged in fire, that dog. Oh my God. So he came crashing into my life, couldn't cope with anything. He had this kind of dual personality almost. On the one side, he's quite cocky and self-assured and very much, on his terms. And on the other side, he couldn't cope with anything. And my late mother was alive then. And when he first came in, it was my mother. I remember literally crying, sitting on the floor next to my mother, crying in her lap. And she actually said to me, stop trying to fix him. And that's when things started to kind of connect a little bit. So these two amazing dogs were so patient with me. Both of them said, look, that's just not going to work for me because we've got to work something out. Then I had the joy of meeting the amazing Sarah Fisher. And I was starting to think about some things. And I'd written a piece called Phantom of the Operant, which that's 5, 6, 7 years ago now. But I'd already had a bit of a relationship with Sarah, but we built up over time. And by the time I'd written that, we were really quite good friends. And Sarah gave me permission to go with some of this stuff because it's tough in the dog world, especially kind of challenging some of the norms, if you like. So Phantom the Operant came out because Sarah pushed me to, and that's when everything kind of shifted. So there you go. That just gives you an idea of why I'm so passionate about starting conversations around behavior and about what that means for the individual.
Absolutely. I want to firstly acknowledge I'm so sorry that happened to you as a child, and also the way that the world responded, also the loss of your dogs and losing your mum. That's a lot. Obviously, we're all on a journey, but within that journey, the realization or the aha moment arrives at different times. So for you, it was with Arthur rather than Milo. And the catalyst was your mum saying, stop trying to fix him. How did your relationship with him continue after that?
Well, everything changed. I think it was just a set of events. Many people find their first secure attachment with an animal, which is very powerful. And as is often the case, they put a mirror up to us. It's what I call the gift. Some people take the gift, some people don't. But there is a gift there, which often is a painful one. Sometimes it doesn't always come nicely wrapped. Through Arthur, it really gave me a chance to bring forward a lot of the things that I already was, and my kind of understanding around behavior. My group's called Dog Centered Care. And that is kind of taken from child-centered care and person-centered care and all this kind of big movement that's come around against the push against behaviorism, often about just changing behavior isn't enough. I think there are three things that unite us all for me, whether you're a dog, cat, horse, human. The first is we all want to feel heard, especially when we're trying to communicate need. And we have to see behavior as a communication of need. Secondly, we all want to feel safe, right? And I think this is such an important thing. And physical safety is the thing that we often have a bias towards when we look at another, because it's the thing that we can evidence. So I can see you are safe. I can see you're safe. But our own brain is equally, if not more, focused on emotional safety and social safety. And that is why you can be safe physically, but not feel it. So we all want to feel safe. We can explore those a little bit if you want to. And then the big word for me is the word relief. This is what I talk a lot about, because I think it's probably the most important word in the psychology of behavior, actually, more so than even safety. And I'll explain why. When we think about the role of mood state, mood, emotions, feelings, all these kind of sensations and responses that we have, why do we have them, especially the negative ones? Well, the reason is because it's supposed to be a drive to action. We want to find relief because we don't want to feel that anymore. Physical pain, for sure, but also emotional pain and social pain. The big area that I lecture on and talk about is around social and emotional pain. So when we feel stuff, especially the negative stuff, physical pain, emotional pain, social pain, we seek relief. And this is the point for me. And if we can't find relief, we don't feel safe. If we can't find relief with our primary social attachment, they become insecure attachments and we don't feel safe. So relief is very important. And most behavioral challenges, we talk about dogs, but could be talking about anybody, but dogs, we're talking about that. Many of the big stuff is relief-seeking behaviors. So this is why we have to really consider things. The use of reinforcement, for me, was definitely about how we moved on, how we did task, transactional things, but in a more nicer, humane way. These conversations about how we move forwards, because we have to understand the coercive and damaging potential of reinforcement. We have to understand that. And I say damaging, it can be very damaging, especially the use of primary reinforcers from an early age to get behaviors that we feel fits some kind of standardized norm. Many children, many listeners now will have been deeply affected by that process. Children should be seen, not heard. Women should be seen, not heard. Minorities should be seen, not heard. It's that kind of process of, well, this is how you should behave. And we will utilize all those kind of operant elements that we can use to get that, regardless of whether you feel heard, feel safe, or finding relief for what you were trying to communicate. So we have to be careful, even with reinforcement. It's the big argument about why punishment. We've got to stop having this kind of argument about, I call it the operant merry-go-round, just arguing about methods and tools, because we just keep going round and round. Because if we're just focusing on how do we get the task done, then you're just going to keep arguing about it. This conversation is how do we support the innate needs of another living thing. So guess what? Punishment then helps with that. But even reinforcement, we have to be careful that we're not just getting a behavior that we find more appropriate whilst that individual is still not feeling heard, as I say, feeling safe or finding relief. And this fits in with, there is a construct in psychology, which is the good-bad continuum, which we're all indoctrinated in, especially here in the West. This notion that this is good behavior and that is bad behavior. You are a good child if you do this, you're a bad child if you do that. And underpinning that is we will reward the good and we will either punish or ignore the bad. And we're so indoctrinated in that we don't even question it, because people are like, well, I want more of the good, don't I? I want less of the bad. It seems to make sense until we start asking some questions around who's deciding what's good or bad, who's creating that narrative, what is promoting that narrative, how binary and how arbitrary is that narrative. And importantly for us, as we have this conversation, what did that behavior represent for the one who's exhibiting it? So dogs are a big victim of this, but so are children more generally. And there is a very clear construct that we know in psychology, which is there is a difference between what we are taught and what we learn. And this is very, very important, because a lot of people use this phrase, well, they've got to learn. The child's got to learn, the dog's got to learn, right? But what are they learning? What do we think we're teaching them? And a lot of people that I worked with when I was working in human therapies who had social anxieties could pinpoint back to adolescence, especially when they were forced into social scenarios by often well-meaning people. There's a saying which is the path to coercion is often laid with good intention. So you must come down and spend time with the family. You must engage in these group activities at school because you've got to learn. We see the same with dogs. Well, you've got to learn to be sociable. You've got to learn these things. But so whilst we feel we are teaching something, what is the individual learning? Well, they're not learning necessarily. In fact, I'd argue they're not, period, to feel safe. They're learning to mask better. They're learning that they don't have a voice. They're learning that their emotions don't count. They're learning that they can't find an exit. So these conversations are very important, especially with the nature of the dogs that I work with, because most of what we know around trauma, and especially in relation to social species, so social pain hypothesis came directly from observation in dogs. That was Panskett. So these dogs that we work with who have the big challenging behaviors, there is some desperate need to communicate something there. So I've got a very simple mantra, which is learn, support, teach. Learn from the dog first as much as you can. Some of the talks I've given, I've shared videos of puppies just telling us stuff, telling us about how they need to navigate the world. So be humble, learn from the dog first, and then support what you've learned for them, support it. And then if you're going to teach anything, try and teach things that are intrinsically valuable to that dog and their ability to thrive and survive. After that, you can train what you like. A lot of the emphasis traditionally and in the norm really is the emphasis is the way around, that somehow the dog must learn stuff. And I see behavior a bit like painting a picture. If you imagine the dog painting the picture, I want them to paint their picture for me. I want them to have the freedom to behave. Now, obviously, if that behavior is potentially dangerous, we have to mitigate for that. But other than that, I need the dog to behave. We shouldn't judge behavior as being somehow, if the dog needs to have a woof, it needs to have a woof. If it needs to have a grumble, it needs to have a grumble. I need the dog to know that you can communicate. What I don't want to be doing is taking the brush off the dog all the time, thinking, I can paint the picture better. So we've got to change a lot of things, how we do things. We've got to change how we view dogs in that first 12 to 18 months, especially, and what it is they're actually learning, regardless of what we're teaching. And definitely dogs who struggle in a quite a big way, especially the ones who are potentially going to use aggression. We've got to work out their survival story.
How does one do that? I find that quite interesting because I know that you work with extreme behavior cases and you're taking positive reinforcement or just noticing the dog, but how do you track back to try and figure out and piece together or connect the dots with regards to what's led to that moment in time?
It comes back to giving ourselves more time to do really good observations. So this is something I speak to with my people I mentor as well, because as well as understanding trying to find a healthy professional presence that we can have that's sustainable over time and is emotionally healthy, we also have to think about the structure within which we work. And I do think, Nadine, I do wonder whether there was this group of dog trainers that went up a mountain once and then came down a few days later and said, oh, we've decided what a dog training class should look like. We're decided what a behavioural construct should look like. Because we've been doing the same flipping thing for God knows how long. If we think about our priorities, and I think there's two statements for me. The first one is, I think your dog is struggling and I'm going to help you change their behaviour. Or I think your dog is struggling and I'm going to help you to support them. I'm very much into the second of those. And if we believe that, then we need to give ourselves time. So when I work with my clients, it's a 3-session initial assessment and appraisal because I need time. The days of going along and having an hour and a half, a couple of hours, somebody writing a big long report and then seeing them a little bit, it's just not fit for purpose, I don't think, if we're going to truly try and understand things. So my first port of call is to really understand the caregiver first and to accept them and to meet them where they are, regardless of the tools they're using, regardless of the words they're using. For me, it's a process of supported awareness. It's not my dog. My gift to them is that I care and I want to help. And I want to support you to have a new awareness of your dog. And we have what we call the 3 A's, which is very important because this permeates all our relationships with these things. Awareness, acknowledgement, acceptance. We have to start off with bringing awareness. It's a big part of the process for me, Nadine, because it's not just about the dog and thinking, okay, the dog's doing this. I've got to get the caregivers to advocate for their dog. Now, this is the thing about those 3 A's, because there's another A really, which is advocacy. But this has been borne out from a lot of studies looking at parents with children with behavioural challenges. So before an awareness that's been offered, their awareness was, well, my child is difficult, naughty, whatever. Our clients, they think their dog is dominant. Guess what? Dominant, difficult, willful, stubborn. Right. So that's it. So we have to bring awareness. We have to bring awareness for them to support their awareness, because I genuinely believe that we have a welfare crisis because of a chronic lack of awareness. The general public just don't know this stuff. And it's noisy out there. They're bombarded with so much crap. Most of it is just about changing behavior. And if it's just about changing behavior, how to do task, as I call it, well, everything's on the table for them. And that's why it's just a bit messy. So we have to support their awareness. Then we need them to acknowledge it. We need to acknowledge that they've learned. And this is the first challenge. And these dynamics, by the way, Nadine, for the trainers listening in, are happening all the time. And that's why we shouldn't beat ourselves up if we can't get those outcomes we wanted, because there's too much other stuff going on. We can't shoulder the weight of outcome on our shoulders, because it's not our dog. We can't do stuff. And so we provide that awareness. So maybe they thought before their dog was difficult, dominant, whatever. And now through our, which we'll unpack in a minute about how we do the observations, they're now more aware that their dog's struggling or in pain, physical pain, of course, but also emotional pain, social pain. They need to acknowledge that. And we've already got the first barrier, because at acknowledgement, that's where blame, shame, and guilt live. And even through us just offering that awareness, many clients will now feel guilt, shame, and blame, because they're like, oh God, I thought my dog was being a bit of a dick, but in fact they were in pain and I've been using this method on them or this tool, or I've been telling them off, So we have to support them through that. That's why the most important thing really is creating a safe relationship with the client first. It has to be no judgment here. I hear you. Tell me more. Tell me more. Why are you using that shock collar? Why are you using that problem collar? Why are you doing this? Tell me more. I want to know. Because that awareness, acknowledgement, acceptance starts with me. I have to become aware of them. I have to acknowledge them, and I have to accept them. I have to accept it. How can I expect them to go through the same with their dog if I haven't done it for them? I have to accept the fact that they're in that space. It's not my dog. I just want to support them. And actually, that's my role then, is to support that awareness and let them know there are other alternatives and there are other things to do. So if we get through acknowledgement, and one of the big things there I say with acknowledgement is guilt. Guilt isn't the enemy. Guilt's our friend a lot of the time. The guilt has one of two ways of going. If people stay stuck with it, then guess what? You can't go back. And that's what eats away at you. Rather than say to clients, don't feel guilty, I say, look, that feeling you're having, tell me more about it. What are you feeling? What are you experiencing? How does this connect to this? Okay, so what actually you're telling me is then you've learned something very deeply through this process. That's why it hurts. So rather than get stuck in the past, use that to motivate you about what you do tomorrow. So guilt, shame, all these things can be really helpful. So if we get through acknowledgement, then we need to get them to acceptance, which is exactly what you were talking about a moment ago. Because
yes,
when we get to that point of being able to have that place of recognizing where we are now and understanding that point and not trying to fix or change in that regard, that's when we get advocacy. Come on to that in a moment. So acceptance. What's the barrier to acceptance? Well, that's where grief lies often. Grief, obviously, for genuine loss, but also grief for the dog we thought we were going to have and we haven't at the moment. Or it's also the place where most of our challenges to our expectations have to happen. So I just want to really let people know it's a hell of a journey that we go through, and the same dynamics apply to human relationships. What we know with those looking at parents with children, before, when the child was dysregulating or struggling, people would see them as having a tantrum or whatever, and they'd feel the judgment of others whilst your child's on the floor in Sainsbury's thrashing about whatever they're doing. We have that perceived judgment of others. It's what we call social evaluative threat. Social evaluative threat is a part of our brain always casting itself around the social environment for perceived rejection. That's why a lot of people get angry with their dogs in public, because they're embarrassed and frustrated, not because they're horrible. They feel it. So what happens is when that parent goes through awareness, actually your child may be behaving this way because they're neurodivergent, or they've had trauma, or they're challenging with other things, or they're having sensory overload, or whatever it is, right? And we help you acknowledge that acceptance. When they get to acceptance, it unlocks advocacy. And that's what we find, even without knowing these mechanics. When you and I work with clients and we get to that sweet spot where they're like, yeah, and, I'm just going to walk away from the situation. I'm not going to do that anymore, or whatever else. They've gone through that process with us. The beautiful thing about advocacy is it's the best shield to the judgment of others. Now I don't care what somebody else thinks. I know what's best for my child or my dog. Then we need to go through awareness, acknowledgement, acceptance with the dog too, from my point of view, and get some really good observations going. We always look at the physical, the emotional, and the social side of things. Always look at these things, break them down, give ourselves time to do really good observations. So if I've got a dog who really struggles around other dogs, the last thing I want to do is observe that dog around other dogs yet. There's three really important words that we know are kind of founded in safety for the individual. And this adds to our observations that we do. And those three words are processing, engagements, and exits. And we know that these are really important for children, especially as part of social information processing. So processing, we all have to process information through our sensory system, and then that's attached to sensory integration, how our brain integrates that information. And that's our external senses and our internal senses. And I want you to imagine the dog's brain has lots of little doors in it, and we need as many of those doors to stay open for that dog to be able to process well and sensory integrate. Pain, physical, emotional, social pain, trauma of any type, and stress of any type, including excitement and frustration, they're all big door closers. They are for us. And guess what? The first doors that are likely to start closing for dogs when they're in that state are the doors we put training behind. If that training has a little intrinsic value to the dog, which is why they can't do it, because that door is closed right now. The doors that stay open, the survival doors. So processing is very important. So there's loads of stuff to observe there about how does this dog process the environment? Why isn't the dog processing the environment very well? Why isn't a lot of that stuff being done subconsciously? What are those sensory filters doing? You know, when we think about sensory processing sensitivities, how does the dog process me? How does the dog process the caregivers? There's a lot of information there about where that nervous system is in time, regardless of anything extra. Then we have engagement. We all want to feel we have agency and choice over engagement, physical, emotional, social, sexual, whatever. And we also have a history of engagement from the past, whether it was good or bad or pleasurable or whatever. And if we do engage, how important is it for us to have a very specific set of criteria to have that engagement? So the more socially sensitive you are, the more you need to tick a few boxes. But if you're a bit more kind of whatever, it's like, yeah, whatever. You know, it's like, oh, hi. Oh, you gave me a hug. Never mind. Other people, they're mortified by it. Oh, my God, you hugged me. Yeah, because that's not on my ticky box. And then if we do engage, we want to feel that we have agency over exits. Trauma is firmly placed in lack of agency over engagement because we're stuck in a situation we didn't want to be in and we can't exit. So understanding that when we work with these dogs then actually gives us an extra richness. How are you engaging with the environment? What does that engagement look like? What are your exit signals? Why aren't you exiting? And it's amazing what you can learn when you start unpacking this. Because then, I'll give you an example. I worked with a dog that was 99% of the time, anytime it would see a dog out, it would respond with lunging and barking and growling, the kind of atypical response for a dog that we get called in for. I'm very lucky I've got a 2-acre space, so that's where I do my observations. So this dog, long line, harness, bringing in stuff into the social environment, an interesting thing kept happening. And this is the thing about us allowing ourselves to do a study of one and just thinking, what does this dog show us? This dog kept doing displacement sniffing or sniffing along the ground and moving to the left every single time. So I thought, well, this is so when he got to like the 5th or 6th time, it's like, well, this is a thing for this dog for some reason. Now, there's a reason why it was always the left, we found out later, because it had real, quite bad fascial tension on that side. So it could only go left. Because if it went right, it would pull that side over. Interesting. That's an extra layer. So when I met the caregivers, they were very much into obedience side of things. So the dog had to walk to heel, and the dog did walk to heel well. But when that change in the social environment happened, the dog couldn't follow that pattern that helped that nervous system find a return to safety. By putting the dog on a harness, because the dog was on a martingale collar, by allowing, God forbid, the dog to walk ahead of them a bit, right? Which, again, is the biggest challenge, is getting the caregivers just to let go of some of that control. The dog started following those patterns. So we actually were teaching that dog, remember, to try and teach things that are intrinsically valuable, that the dog can do those exit patterns. And probably about 90% of that dog's response went because it was able to find that return to safety. A lot of dogs, just before they go, even the ones that have big reactions, you'll see little windows of looking for exits, but there isn't one because they're on a lead. But it just goes to show how we can unpack things if we're looking at things differently. One last point on this. It's really important that we let clients know that we're not going to measure progress based on behavior on or off, because it just drives you nuts. And also, it's not fair on the dog. I want them to behave. I want them to behave because I want that information. As the wonderful Suzanne Clothier says, how's that for you? What's that look like? And this is how we do sensory mapping. We're going to add this layer in. What's that like for you? Can you regulate for that? Do you need me to help you through co-regulation? That's another topic on its own, but or can you not manage with this? So I need the dog to behave. So we look for changes then, rather than whether the behavior happens or not. We look for changes in intensity, look for changes in frequency, and look for changes in recovery. And this is really important for my clients because we have negative bias. If the clients are just thinking, oh yeah, I must stop the dog barking at the dogs, they could go past 9 dogs and do that. But if the 10th dog, the dog barks, they now feel it's not working. Whereas working this way, they're like, right, 9 times my dog was showing I'm coping better. That 10th one that showed to me that they're not coping so well. And it's really important that us then as professionals structure our support sessions in that way. So when I do a coaching walk, the first 5 minutes are checking in. How are you feeling today? To the caregiver, this is. And then also, how's Rover been? Great. And then saying, this is the route we're going to take today. How does that feel for you? Because a lot of the time the caregiver's like, bloody hell, do you think we can do that today? Oh my God. I'm like, yeah, I feel we can. But, let's talk about it. I have a safe word with my clients, which is banana. And actually, it's amazing how often they say it. Because what happens is when we think about the psychology of it, we're doing a coaching walk together, their own threat evaluation, thinking, oh my God, we're going to have to do this now. I can't cope with this. They get very quiet and they get very stiff and they get very tense. They also feel, because of that fear of judgment, they can't say that. But interestingly, they feel they can say banana now. So when they say banana, I'm like, okay, let's find a space where we can just go somewhere else and share with me. And then the last 10 minutes of that session is a debrief. At the start, I'll say something like, okay, let's see what the environment's going to throw at us today. Because as the professional, this is talking to professionals again, I'm not going to take the weight of those outcomes on that walk. So as professionals, then we have to set the scene, set that relationship up. I'm here to support you. Let's see what happens in the environment. And then those 10 minutes at the end, how did that feel for you today? Let's think about the good stuff, or especially if the walk didn't go so well in parts, what did we learn today about Rover? What's Rover telling us about how well they're coping or not? It's just moving away from this obsession with changing behavior and just thinking about, what is this dog letting us know is their support needs? The really serious stuff, when dogs are potentially dangerous, we have to take a layered approach. I would say of that group of dogs, everyone I've worked with was in pain, physical pain often, but emotional pain as well. So we have to look at these things. We have to look at the physical side of stuff. We have to look at how that sensory integration system is working or not working, what that nervous system's like. Is that dog able to get down to that kind of return to safety? And a big one is mood state, Nadine. This is a talk on its own, I know, but we can literally plot mood state through what we call core affect space. And a lot of these dogs have ended up in the other side of the line, which means they've got a pessimistic bias. Pessimistic bias, it's a big challenge. It's a big challenge for humans who have anxiety too, because the trouble about moving into pessimistic bias, you can totally presume that bad things are going to happen. That's one side of it. But more commonly, it's just that you're not presuming something good will. And that's a challenge for reinforcement again, because if your neurochemical mood state, core affect state is that you're not going to get that kick from something good happening because you're not presuming it will, that's a challenge. And a lot of these dogs have that, especially regarding social processing. They do not feel socially safe. And sadly, a lot of this stems from their inability to create secure attachment, which is not the caregiver's fault, that they're just unaware of it. Because from a young age, that dog's main relationship with the caregiver hasn't been centered around that. It's been centered around training.
Makes perfect sense. Yeah. And I think that's really key there, isn't it? Because a lot of people will get a new dog or a puppy and then immediately start panicking because they need to start training the dog. And I think that need for training potentially multiple avenues, but potentially comes from the perceived, like, if we don't tackle this now, what could happen? So that pessimistic bias that you're talking about, the dog guardians have that themselves. If I don't do this now, the knock-on effect is going to be this social rejection potentially, because I didn't deal with a perceived problem, even though nothing is there at that moment in time early enough. I find this really fascinating, and thank you for sharing all of that with me. I ended up creating something called Mona Mondays with my podcast listeners, in which we learn to identify the language of how we feel, not the behavior of the dog, but how something relating to our experience with our dog makes us feel. So it's not so much about solving the problem or fixing anything. It's just about finding the words and identifying it and then naming it, so that that thing doesn't then grow and fester and become resentment. Have you ever seen practices like that with dog guardians or owners? Is that something that canine behaviorists kind of pass on to the guardians?
I can't speak for others. I would imagine, sadly, there isn't enough understanding of that. This is the 3 A's again, because the 3 A's are also for us. It's allowing ourselves self-awareness and acknowledging those feelings and understanding them. We'll come on to that in a moment. And then accepting them. We have this, because we do like to put things into threes, but there's the 3 R's, which is resonate, reframe, return. And this is another thing that's important, because there are going to be things that trigger us, resonate with us on whatever field. And we have to, that's why it's so connected with the awareness side of things. We have to allow ourselves to reframe that. This is the thing about emotional safety. Emotional safety is kind of founded in two very important things. One is feeling safe to even feel. And a lot of us within our lifetimes have been in situations where we feel that our feelings are somehow invalid or silly or not accepted. But the second one is huge, and it's really important for dogs too, and that is feeling safe to communicate how you feel. We need the dogs to, but so do we. So we should call it for what it is. And a lot of these things, people feel they can't talk about it. So actually it now becomes an emotionally unsafe topic for them. So the 3 R's: resonate, reframe, return. Yes, you'll say about this part of the brain. There's a part of our brain, which is our kind of survival part of our brain, very sensitive, paranoid sometimes, a little bit quick to fire off, I think it's quite helpful to name that part of the brain. Mine's called Bob. We have to break bread with Bob. We have to find a way of having peace with Bob sometimes, because feelings are not facts. And the thing is with Bob, we have to understand Bob just wants to keep us safe. That's the point. But Bob can use quite destructive language sometimes, and we have to allow our time to be aware of that again and thinking, okay, I hear you, but I don't have to respond to that. The problem with social media, of course, especially in the dog training world, it's a lot of people's Bobs having a go at each other. This is the problem. So the reframe is important, because often it's Bob that we're reframing with. Something's resonated, frame it. So, for example, oh God, I feel really bad because I'm not doing this, this, and this. We have to sit with that. We have to feel it. Okay. And there's always two things we have to think about. What does that tell me about my own self-awareness and my own story? What's that reminding me here about my own insecure attachments view, or have I got a bit of an anxious attached relationship with my dog? And remember, none of these things are rocks to have around our neck. It's just awareness. It's like, right, I can understand based on some of these things that happened in my life, how I might respond to the world today. So that gives me information that I can think about. And that helps with the reframe. So the reframe might be, but this dog is safe and warm and, might not be able to do everything it wants to do all the time, but there's these things going on. And I know that I can do this, this, and this. And that's how we return it. And returning is sometimes, if we're working, say, with clients and they say something we find quite triggering, the reframing might be about, okay, remember my role here. I'm not here to throw my judgment and expectations and values on you. So I'm going to return it with a question. I'm going to turn it back to. Sometimes behind my screen here, I've got a little frame that says, not my circus, not my monkeys, because sometimes Bob's there and I'm thinking, oh, and I look at that and I think, right, I've returned this to the universe. It is not my circus. So yeah, those 3 R's: resonate, reframe, and return. These are great skills for the general public too. And one thing that we have to recognize is, a big problem for caregivers, a big problem for just human beings, really, but especially within animal care, is the notion of unbounded empathy, because we feel so deeply, but we don't put that into context and we don't have healthy boundaries for that. And that's how we can fall from caring into carrying. We can fall from supporting into saving. This is the same dynamic for that is involved in caregiver burden often, and definitely within relationships with us within animal care. And it leads to burnout. It leads to compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue is a clear sign that we have not had self-compassion first. And actually, because, being compassionate, we can give out compassion all day if we are in a well-regulated and supported state ourselves. And that's a big thing for caregivers. We need more support. It's brilliant what you're doing there, by the way. I think I really applaud you for that. People want to feel heard. They don't necessarily want to have answers. They just want to feel heard, and they want to feel validated for that. They want to feel that, oh God, I'm not the only one who feels embarrassed by my dog. I'm the only one who feels frustrated by them, angry by them. And one of the things I talk about when I gave that chat to these wonderful caregivers and we were talking about it, and it was a chat, I didn't use a PowerPoint, it was just, let's talk about some stuff. I started off by asking them to give some positive names for their dog, positive descriptions, and we just wrote them down. Funny, clever, whatever. And then the more negative ones, about challenging, difficult, whatever, and all the emotions. One of the most powerful things to recognize here, and it's a big reliever, is the power of the word "and." I love my dog, and I find them challenging sometimes. Not but diminishes the first. We can be both. It's the same when we look back at our past. I'll share about my own story again. I look back, and especially with my father, he was amazing, my father. He loved me, he was great, but he was away too much. And I see that now. So now I can look back and I can think, I loved my father and he loved me. And I recognize the harm that was caused by his absence. So "and" is very powerful. I think caregivers need to hear that word, because it stops a lot of the internal struggle with it. I feel bad because of
Yeah.
this, but we can be both.
Exactly. There can be two truths at the same time. It's
Okay.
not either or. Absolutely. So, I guess if you can validate your own feelings, well, have the awareness first and then validate your own feelings. And as you say, well, essentially talk to yourself in a kind manner and then reframe. If we develop that skill, and I guess the mirror in terms of our creature teacher, our dogs, what they're trying to teach us is if we're able to do that for ourselves, we're able to do that for our dogs, right?
100%. And this is the beautiful thing about it. It's also the challenging thing about it. But all of us have ended up being to a certain level, to a certain extent, formative, performing a role based upon often societal norms, what we think our parents wanted from us, what we think society wants from us, and all that kind of thing. And we lose touch with self over that period of time. Dogs are screaming at us the power of self to be authentic and to break away from just being so rigid in that good bad continuum. When you have these conversations, though, some people say, "Well, what are you trying to say? That anybody can do anything they want?" It doesn't. It's not a case of that. It's about getting some balance in the middle, really, where we feel that we are enough.
That's exactly it. I'm learning so much in this journey about myself, about dogs, about society, so many different things. And I find it all really fascinating. I spoke with Professor Adam McCloskey a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about the attachment styles. And I realized Duna, my foster dog, is potentially my first secure attachment. And the irony in that is just insane because she's 8 years old and she's had this just incredibly unfair life. And I'm seeing her blossom. And through seeing her blossom, it's kind of doing something for me. And it's not the kind of savior complex because I'm not interested in that. It's more about honing and developing my skill of seeing, of noticing, observing, and then also validating another creature's experience.
Can't put that genie back in the bottle, sadly, because my late father said everything comes at a price. Of course, love comes at the biggest price when we think about loss. But I think that increased awareness, it comes at a price because you have to find ways to turn up sustainably to the world in that emotionally healthy way. I think what you're doing, even with this podcast and getting these conversations and having the kind of opportunity for people to come together and talk and examine things is brilliant, by the way. And I think you're right about dog training. I have a lot of people who come to me and through my mentoring, and because they kind of feel that shift for them away from some of the traditional ways of training. I'm not talking about punishment necessarily, but the kind of sit down conversation, and they feel uncomfortable even with the term dog trainer. But it doesn't matter about any of that stuff. I get to decide what a dog trainer is. I get to decide what a behaviourist. I get to decide that. It is about finding that way for our activism, which is born out of our own story, a home for it, Nadine. And you found your home doing your thing, and mine for mine. And I really appreciate the conversation we've had today, and we've gone through a lot of bits and pieces, I'm sure. But ultimately, I think you and I are on the same page with it, which is inviting people to connect, not to think differently, but to feel differently and to feel validated for those feelings and to find a way of connecting through those.
Yes, and to say, I guess to some degree, being present in the moment and accepting that you are a flawed human being and you're going to make mistakes. And tomorrow, guess what? Hopefully, you have another opportunity to try again. That should
Yeah.
be enough. But the intention is behind it. The intention is the most important thing, isn't it? And hopefully, like learning by living by example, it will have a ripple effect that enables other people to think, reflect, have that awareness, and then apply, as you said, these kind of new ways of being or thinking to how they treat the beings, not just dogs, around them. Yeah, before we go, if you don't mind, could you just touch on cake and tea, please?
Yeah, of course. Well, cake is great because this allows us, it helps us to turn up to others, I think. So CAKE is an acronym which is compassion, awareness, knowledge, and empathy. So compassion is what allows us to turn up in the first place, really. And being compassionate is not about approving or being permissive. It's about turning up. That's the thing about compassion, is we want to turn up anyway. So compassion is important, and it's about us turning up. And then awareness is about allowing ourselves to be available to the awareness of the other's lived experience, which allows us to check our own biases and egos in at the door. And then knowledge, especially as a professional, this is what I was talking about with those three lenses. I might know stuff, but I want to know your stuff. I want to seek knowledge from you. Because then if we have that compassion, awareness, and knowledge, then we're more likely to have that empathy. I have a sense of your experience. And then tea is just what we do on top of that, really, because cake is great. We all love cake, right? So that's why we bring cake. And then I prefer coffee myself, but I couldn't think of the acronym for that. So tea, because we're British, right? But tea, time. I need to give you time to share that story. I need to give my client time to share that story, whoever it is. And then the E is encourage, to encourage more of your story, not to stop you because you're saying it wrong or you're using the wrong language or whatever else. And then acknowledge. That's where the acknowledgement comes in, to acknowledge that and say, I hear you. I hear you. I get it. And I think this, if we could have more discourse like that, then I think we'd be able to understand each other more. But it is very challenging because social safety comes into this very much. This is what sadly politicians have played into for forever, because our brain seeks the same and wants to be distanced from different. And so it's very primal, some of this stuff, and that's sadly what they tap into. So one thing I would say, two things actually. First of all, to caregivers listening in, your dog's not broken. You don't have to fix them. You don't have to feel like you're at this kind of battle. There are other ways. I just want to really stress that. And secondly, if you are somebody who cares deeply, who's very sensitive, and this is often when I work with people, this is kind of general, I know, but it's often the lady, the female in a relationship, who takes the emotional burden, and is often told, the dog's okay with me, or you're being too sensitive, or you put your heart on his sleeve. Don't take those as criticisms. See them as somebody identifying our strengths. Because actually, I talked about Bob earlier. Responding to Bob is easy. Taking a breath and having compassion and having care is actually the pinnacle of human existence for me. It takes a lot to be able to do that sometimes. And I think that's what we've got to keep practicing. But we have to start with who we see in the mirror first.
Yes, absolutely. Is there anything that you're working on at the moment that you would like to make people aware of?
Yeah, I think any professionals listening in, I'm just finishing off a care-centered working course, which is looking about how we work in a care-centered way. And I'm writing a book. So on a lot of this stuff, which is, there's plenty of dog training books out there, but the working title is Know Your Dog, Know Yourself. That might be on the shelves by next Christmas if I can get around to it. But other than that, I've got my dog centre care group, which is really open for everybody. There's so many caregivers in there. I call them expert caregivers. These are people who've tried the usual stuff and they've just gone on their own journey, and it's been a powerful one for them, and they really know their stuff and they understand the depth of those connections. And some of the best conversations in my group have come from caregivers. There's something for everybody in there, and as well as the YouTube channel. But thank you for having me to chat with you today.
My absolute pleasure.